Good evening, everyone. It's Miss Leyna here again. So I'm here to continue our story about Mary Driscoll. We're on part 3. Thursday, May 6th, 1847, at sea. We must all sleep one above the other and within arm's length. I dare not undress to change into my sleeping gown. My berth is so narrow and uncomfortable, I must sleep on my side. 'Tis difficult to write down here. Sunday, May 9th, 1847, at sea. The O'Donnells have been kind enough to share their food with me. Today we had butter and bread. If it were not for them, I would be hungry most of the time. My hard-boiled eggs and the oatmeal cakes are already gone. I was unable to get any tea for the oatmeal cakes and had to eat them as brittle as they were. The ship's crew provides little to eat besides these awful biscuits. Tonight the O'Donnells cooked a stew with the Corcorans. Everyone eats from the same kettle. The rolling of the boat caused the kettle to sway. The stew spilled over the sides and put out the fire. Thankfully, I do not suffer from seasickness like so many around me. The Corcorans have 2 pretty twin girls, Molly and Sophie, and Brendan, who is 9. I asked Mrs. Corcoran how old the twins were, and they shouted out, "Guess!" I pretended to give the question great consideration. 3, I said, and they shook their heads, delighted that they had fooled me on my first guess. Again I appeared lost in thought. 2? This caused even greater delight. 'Twas true, I was going off track, leaving them no choice but to tell me. They looked at each other, deciding who would tell. 7, Molly said. My, I said. I have never met twins that old, never in all my days. I'm the oldest, Molly said proudly. The whole while Brendan kept his distance. He doesn't trust me, that one. But that's just because I'm a girl. Mrs. Corcoran is fine company. She is lovely to talk to and spends most of her time watching the children. Mr. Corcoran reminds me of Dad, smoking his pipe and keeping to himself. When the weather is fair, he plays cards on deck. Tuesday, May 11th, 1847, at sea. I went up with the Corcorans this morning to have water pumped into our cans for the large barrels on deck. 'Tis barely enough to satisfy our thirst, and there is hardly any left for cooking. We save the cooking water and use it to wash. One of the barrels leaked, and another was undrinkable because it once held vinegar. 'Tis a shame, because there is not enough to waste. There are only 2 privies for all of us. Both are above deck at the front of the ship. 'Tis impossible to use them without becoming soaked from the wind and the spray. Worse than the long wait and the drenching are the rats that are always lurking about. Mrs. O'Donnell tells me to make as much noise as possible in order to scare them off. I do, but they don't seem to be too afraid. Many take care of this below decks. There's a constant foul odor down there. In good weather, the main decks are so crowded during the day that 'tis difficult to find a place to stand. Mrs. O'Donnell has offered me the use of their chamber pot. She's so kind to watch over me. She showed me how to keep it clean. Once a day now, I go up on deck, tie the chamber pot to a rope, and empty it over the side. Then I dip it into the ocean, and I pull it back up by the rope. Glad I am to be a help in some way. The twins have taken a liking to me. I tell them a story every morning now. It helps pass the time. They are more easily entertained than Brendan. The wee girls, especially Molly, are bolder than their brother. He is timid as a fawn, that one. This morning we played hide and seek. The girls raced down the cluttered aisles and found many clever places to hide. When I found them, they shrieked with joy. But I never could find Brendan's hiding place. He only came out after I had given up. Mrs. Corcoran thanked me for playing with the children. She said that this sorrowful voyage is hardest on them. I think so too. There's nothing to occupy their time, and much that is bewildering. Wednesday, May 12th, 1847, at sea. A violent gale began 2 days ago. The ship has been rolling awfully ever since. The wind whips around, and the storm-tossed sea bursts open the decks with terrible force. The waves are so fierce that they rush down into the lower decks. Everything is closed off below to keep the water out. I expect at any moment for the ship to cave in, sending us to the bottom of the salt sea ocean. 'Tis like a dark, airless dungeon down here. Lord knows I am frightened, but I do my best to hide my fears so the children won't be any worse for it. Last night I could hear Brendan crying out my name. The Corcoran's sleeping berth is not far from mine. I made my way to him as best I could. 'Twas so dark I tripped over people who shouted angrily at me. I whispered, "Brendan," as loud as I dared. Finally I heard, "Mary, over here." Poor boy, he says he wants to go home. I explained that he is going to a new home, a better home, but he was having none of it. Why, he cried, can't we go to my old home? What's the matter with my old home? Then he buried his head in my lap and cried himself to sleep while I sang to him softly. On the wings of the night, may your fury be crossed. May no one that's dear to our island be lost. Blow the winds gently, calm be the foam, shine the light brightly to guide them back home. Thursday, May 13th, 1847, at sea. 3 days now have I been forced to stay below because of the storm. I was kept awake by Mr. O'Donnell, who is suffering from the ship fever. He moans day and night and cries out for water. I made my way slowly over to their berth and asked Mrs. O'Donnell if there was anything I could do. She shook her head and squeezed my hand. I stayed with her for a bit, both of us silent. After a while I could stay down there no longer and went above. The wind had stopped, though 'twas still raining as fast as it could. I crawled under a sail that lay on deck, hoping 'twould protect me. After a time I felt another leg touching mine. 'Twas a boy, older than me, to be sure, but there was barely enough light to see. I couldn't tell if his eyes were open or closed. Didn't I think he was sleeping or just keeping still? I prayed he wasn't dead. We stayed like that for the longest time. I dared not to move or make a sound. I hardly took a breath. Finally he spoke. I'm Sean Riordan, said he, as if that were something to be proud of. I told him my name. Then silence. The rain had stopped. He said we should come out from under the sail, now that the storm had passed. He had a cheerful voice. He showed me how to stretch the sail so we could catch rainwater in a water can. Moved like a cat, he did, cautiously. I'm going to find work in America, he said. His uncle Patrick Quinn sent the money for his ticket. He has been living in Boston for 5 years now. He owns a tavern. I told Sean about Aunt Nora and my plans to work in the mills. Do they hire Irish, he asked. I must have made a queer face. Some places don't hire Irish, you know, he said. Sean said that someday he would like to be rich. What would I do if I were rich, he was asking. I would bring Ma and Dad to America, I told him. And then, he went on, what would you do then? I told him I would live in a big house on a cliff overlooking the ocean, and I would spend my days watching the waves come in while the seals sun themselves on the rocks. And you, I asked? He thought carefully and looked away before talking. He said he would bring everyone from Ireland to America. That would leave the English with what they deserve, a country with no people. Suddenly I felt cold. I must be off, I said. I had been away too long. I had to go below and see how Mr. O'Donnell was faring. Sean wanted to lend a hand, but I said no. I thought it best I go alone. Monday, May 17th, 1847, at sea. Mr. O'Donnell is still feverish. I sat with Mrs. O'Donnell while she wiped his damp brow with a cloth. He sleeps most of the day, thank the Lord. Mrs. O'Donnell is knitting a sweater for her daughter, whom they haven't seen in 2 years. She is living with a family in Boston. Mrs. O'Donnell says 'twas best for the child. 'Tis certain she misses Alice greatly. I think this is why she has been so kind to me. She said it must have been hard for Ma to let me go to America. 'Tis hard for all the mothers, she said. The O'Donnells are eager to see their daughter again. We'll make it all up to her then, she said, though I'm not sure of her meaning. She went on for some time. Mrs. O'Donnell says I am very patient for a wee girl. I suppose I am. I like listening to people, if that's what she means by patient. Besides, I told her, I'm not a wee girl. I'm 14. Wednesday, May 19th, 1847, at sea. I can't write down below. 'Tis too dark, and I can find no peace. At least on deck 'tis light. There are times during the night when I awake with the shivers and can't breathe. There is no air, and it feels as if there's a heavy weight sitting on my chest. When that happens, I can never go back to sleep. All right, so I hope you guys have a great day and listen in for the next part of our story. Bye.